I thought they may actually show us some photos of the real car rather than the 3D model rendered on the release. But both are interesting. Both are different, which is, we come to expect from everybody. If you look at some of the other, we call them launches, they're not new car launches now, they're season launches or even driver suit launches, which I don't entirely understand. But yeah, the Mercedes is certainly one of the more interesting cars we've seen so far. Taking the front to kick off with, while I think we can ignore a lot of what we see as the front wing shape and the end plate shape, because that will no doubt change. But one of the interesting things is for 2026, we have what's going to be known as active aero. So it's a kind of like a DRS that the driver can use every lap. So once they're into one of the activation zones, which they can be, as I say, every lap, it's not dependent on them being near another car like DRS was. You can open the front and the rear wings at the same time to reduce drag. So you make more of the power and the energy that's available in these new power units. Now, at the back, you've got a 3-element rear wing, and at the front, you've got a 3-element front wing. Now, we expected most of the teams to have the 2 front flaps on the front wing open up when you're going into straight line mode, which is when you're obviously on the straights. Now, with Mercedes, they've done something quite different. They've actually mounted this 3-element wing on the middle element. So the front element is completely unattached to the pylons under the nose. But then that means only the rear flap can open with active aero when you're in straight line mode. No other team has done this. Everyone else appears to be opening the 2 rearmost flaps for their active aero setup. Mercedes doing something quite different. And I don't know how important this is, but the main thing is when you're activating the front and the rear wings in straight line mode is that you can maintain a balance on the car. You don't want it to be too oversteery, so you don't want it to be very understeery, but maybe you want to err towards that side. They call it straight line mode because I think that's quite easy for us to understand. But the activation point will probably come quite soon after a corner, and then won't end until you're coming towards the braking zone at the end of that piece of track. Now, of course, that piece of track isn't necessarily dead straight. It could be curves. It could be high-speed corners. If you think of circuits like Spa, where you're quite easily able to run DRS through some of the really fast turns because the car's just got that much innate downforce produced from the underfloor and the rest of the surfaces. You don't need the wings, and that's typically around sort of 200, 250 kph. So, yeah, they will still need to negotiate what you may describe as, fairly open curves. But still at high speed, as we saw with the Ferrari, if you haven't got high speed balance, it's very unpleasant for the driver. So you still need to find that balance. And that's why the regulations had always envisaged that you would have both the front wing and the rear wing opening in straight line mode when you activate the active aero. So only opening a little bit of the front wing may just be how they find a bit more balance with the car. So something that's quite different. No doubt other teams have looked at this and may present different types of wings at different types of circuits. It's all quite unknown to us. We haven't got the data from that the teams have done all the simulations on. So that's something to have a look at there. Then as we go through the rest of the car, Mercedes have retained their front pushrod suspension. They've not gone very extreme with what everyone's calling anti-dive on the front suspension. I don't believe it is anti-dive. I mean, I think we've said this for a number of years now. It's much more about aerodynamics. And I think this year teams seem to be erring split 50-50 really towards having inclined front wishbones or relatively flat front wishbones. Again, it's not something that's going to make any difference to overall performance in a big way. It's just one of those little detail changes. And if it's on the launch car, then obviously it's not something that's going to change. It's one of those hard things that's on the car. Probably the most interesting thing on the car are the side pods. Now, the launch renders showed us one type of shape of side pods, which were quite complicated and quite different to everyone else that we've seen. And then as we saw some of the videos that Mercedes released from the car exiting the garage on its shakedown at Silverstone, we see a slightly different shape. Now, they seem to be trying to maintain a very deep undercut underneath the side pods, which gets, lots of high energy air back towards the diffuser without being interrupted by the shape of the side pod or these new barge boards, which we call wake boards, that actually pull the tire wake back into the center of the car. So it looks like they're trying to kind of segment different airflows for different functions. And then as the air that comes over the top of the side pods, that again is something slightly different. It's not one of these full downwash side pods that we've seen on most of the other cars that have launched. It seems to have, some of it will kind of downwash completely, and some of it is kind of tucked into the cooling cannons that come out of the back of the car. Again, I just get the feeling Mercedes have got a lot more changes to come in this area, and it won't be unusual. We know, they launched the car with the zero side pods, with conventional side pods, and any number of previous iterations of Mercedes have had something quite big hidden. So I think it's an area that we need to keep an eye on, and I think a lot of the teams are all trying quite different things with the airflow because of the way this new in-wash aero philosophy that's regulated into the rules with those barge boards behind the front wheels. Everyone's going to have a slightly different way of working on it, and I think we'll see quite different cars, at least for the first half of the season, certainly for the first full season, and then everyone will slowly start to converge on the same ideas, if we say, work out which ones are best.
And then we get to the back of the car, and this really is where the big surprise came. I've only just picked up these images before we came on for this chat and found out something quite important on the Mercedes, almost groundbreaking, I guess you could call it. When you think of a diffuser, you think of a closed ramp section in order to keep the air at low pressure inside the diffuser. But then we think of some other alternatives, things like the double diffuser or Red Bull's first blown diffuser, which had an opening in it. And Mercedes have done something similar, what I would call a slotted diffuser rather than a double diffuser, something quite different. And what they're doing is actually encouraging air to go in to the diffuser along those outer side walls and at the top of the tunnel. And what this does actually helps the air speed up, because it gets a bit lazy by the time it gets to the back of the diffuser in an area like this. And this, while will actually create local losses by the wall, but actually overall it helps the expansion of the airflow inside the diffuser, giving the team potentially more downforce. And I think this all works in combination with that big undercut that we mentioned on the side pod, directing lots of airflow through towards this slot in order to push more air through. Great, even more expansion inside the diffuser. I'm sure a lot of people will be looking at this and scratching their head thinking, well, how is this legal? The regulation shouldn't allow much more than a very small mouse hole, which we saw under the previous regulations in that area. I believe this is not so much to do with the diffuser regulations and the floor wall, as the regulations call it, but actually how they integrate with the brake duct or the brake deflector regulations, where the two can't be too close, and that then gives you an exception to create slightly different body shape. I imagine everyone is going to go back to the rule book and look at some of their previous aero work, see if it's something that they can adopt. Again, with any development we see on a test car, you have to have that caveat: is this real? Is this just something that they're winding everyone up about? I doubt that very much. But again, we will just have to see how this shakes out through testing. And more importantly, when we get to Melbourne, which is the first time that the cars are scrutineered and other teams could potentially protest or indeed copy it by then as well.